guys, um, we're trying out community service today. Maybe for like an hour or so, and then I gotta go to work. We'll see what happens. Do 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 do, and I'm gonna listen to Thor and talk about high. So
High, mid laner, formerly of Cloud9, is quite clearly one of the best shot callers in the history of League of Legends. Even when we take other regions, even famously Korea, which has obviously been the best region for the majority of the game, even in the context of the best Koreans, based on what we know and based on what we can see in terms of the effect on his teams in the game, High is right up there with the best that have ever played the game as an in-game leader, as a shot caller. You look at Season 4 Cloud9, the period beyond where they first broke onto the scene, and initially, in terms of the context of how good people were mechanically in NA, they were able to stay up to the standard of some of the top teams. Season 4 was when a bunch of people were better than mechanically. A bunch of, especially the Asian teams, were far ahead of them. But they still displayed world-class decision-making and in changing metas as you played around different positions, as the actual metagame of how you played macro style absolutely changed.
Freak
But the
Fortress
problem is,
name
obviously, they couldn't go deep
video
internationally. They couldn't really make
Guild
like a final of a
Academy.
Worlds. They couldn't potentially win a huge international
No
tournament.
Heroes
But that
Field
was primarily down
Extreme.
to player strength across the board, pretty much. Almost every position had a player who wasn't as good as top Asian players at that, or sometimes even top EU players at their position. Now, in Season 5, Cloud9 was way worse. I mean, obviously, High wasn't even playing as a mid laner once we
Idle
got to the summer.
Trade.
And in the context of the West, they were nowhere near what they used to be. But they
Let's see
still
if-
managed, by
let's
the
find
end
a
of
good
the summer
latency
split,
map
by the time
with
the regional came
decent
along,
player
to get
count.
wins, to be able to actually defeat
Casual
but much better
MVM.
opponents in terms of players, in terms of roster, in terms of actual performance during the season.
This is role play.
Primarily because High was able to identify the few ways in which they could win. They no longer had a plethora of ways or all these possible decisions. They had to identify the few that were even possible in the context of what they had as a team and what the opponent had to offer, and therefore
Okay,
what the path
latency's up there.
towards any kind of victory was. But they were able to do so, therefore they were able to win the regional, they were able to get to
Let's do
Worlds,
the
and at
casual
Worlds they were able to have that ridiculous
NVM
first
one.
week
Hold
where they
on,
got all
sorry.
those wins. His teams have always correctly emphasized the right carry in the team. This is something I think is remarkable because it's not just about shot calling, it's about how you see the game. Now, how much he had to do with this, we can't necessarily know. And certainly, there was some group discussions, and that people also had to sacrifice within the team and understand this. But if you look at all of the iterations of Cloud9 that High played within, including the different positions he was in, they always
Mario Kart
emphasized
2,
the lane
front.
that actually had the player who was playing in the context of his peers the best at that period of time, and usually within the meta was in some sense enabled and capable of carrying the game. That's how they could switch around. They could go from Meteos being this monster farming jungler to having Balls
Yeah.
be this carry top laner and using it to push down objectives early, to going to Sneaky in Season 4 being one of the best AD carries, and a guy who, especially with that meta, if you think of the champions that were being used AD carry, it really fit his time to kind of shine and be one of the best Western AD carries. Season after season, High has shown the ability to shot call regardless of the meta. Now, that doesn't mean he always adapted very quickly to the meta, or he always understood the meta, or he always had the pieces to be the best in the meta, but given enough time, he always did adapt, and his shot calling, once again, was activated, was effective, was something that actually could impact your chances of winning the game beyond just the players that you had and the champions that were picked for them in pick ban. He's someone where he's shown that he is good at reading the game. As the game unfolds, he sees what's happening, he sees what can happen, he sees what his team can do, he sees what is going on with the different champions, he sees the basic win conditions, so he reads the game, he takes information from his teammates, he seems to be someone who's very good at using actual verbal calls of his own in order to elicit the right information from his teammates. This is something he used to do as a mid laner quite well with his jungler, and as a result knows when it's possible for his team to rotate around the map, take objectives, when they can do dives, etc. Once he then has this information, has read the game, he is fantastic. Probably his best quality, as far as I can tell, is decisive calls. It's the idea of having 5 seconds in which to make a call, and instead of spending 4.9 seconds thinking, I could do this, but I also could do this, and would that be perfect, and would there be a flaw with that, and what do you think of this? Going, I've got 5 seconds to make this call, okay, what's possible,
Yeah,
which is possible to do right now. 5th second, we do it now. That's like the difference in terms of how to make the choice. Therefore, he's not met with this indecision at the end, or this hesitation. He makes the call, and you live with the consequences. And if it doesn't work out, you hope that by studying the game back and seeing what happened in the game, positive and negative, the next time you make a better call in that one. But the mechanism of the decisive call has always been a hallmark of High's shot calling. And so he hasn't always had the perfect plan or the response to what was happening in the game. But there has always been this logic or rationale that you could intuit, that you could ask him about in an interview, that you could hear him talk about later, that fit in with his philosophy of how to play the game. And as such, because of this decisive nature, and the fact his teammates can trust in that, means that you get everyone onto the same page. So even when they have the weaker roster, a weak roster that are all on the same page, absolutely in League of Legends, in most team sports, can be a much more skilled team individually who aren't playing on the same page, who have differing ideas, or who have a element of hesitation and second guessing within their makeup and how they operate in terms of their shot call, their modus operandi. He's someone who has repeatedly shown this fast decision making. So he's decisive, but he's also fast. Like the way High shot calls is almost like the speed chess approach. It's like I make a move now, and actually the speed and decisive nature of my move puts the pressure on you to make a move. And then when you make a move, I'm immediately reacting really quickly, and you might get drawn into the battle of thinking, right, well, I've got to react as quickly. But if that's not your skill set, that then weakens you and gives me the edge. And if you don't react at all, you wait longer, now I could be making more moves, and now you're putting under more pressure. So this style, it's not going to work against everyone. There will be people who can
Mad Max in here.
Defensive teams at times in League of Legends history. But it's going to work against a lot of teams, especially those middle of the ground teams. They're the teams that are going to get torn up. So one of the things that's amazing to me about High's style of play and his shot call is that because of this nature, these qualities that it's embodied and imbued over the years, it's been someone where even when he was on those lesser teams, when Cloud9 wasn't the best team anymore, when they weren't the best team mechanically anymore, when they were a team that actually, eventually, he wasn't even that good as a player in some of the other positions he played, and his teams shouldn't really, by any rights, have even been getting to Worlds and having chances there. Even in these scenarios, I always found it enjoyable to watch him play because there was a logic to it. There was a rationale. It made sense what was happening in the context of how he thinks about the game. So actually, even when they lost, I could find it enjoyable to see, I just missed that little thing there, or it's an interesting idea what he did before, but they didn't quite execute it properly, or he actually made a misstep, he didn't do the correct response there, but I can see what he was thinking. There's an intellectual stimulation to watching them play the game beyond just watching good individual players make an okay move or fumble their way into a nice move. Which is not that everyone does that. There's obviously a spectrum here, but he's very much more on the intellectual end of it. Whether he actually consciously thinks these things or whether he's just got this great intuitive understanding for the game, I don't really know the guy personally, so I can't really speculate too much on that respect. In that respect, and so when you watch him play and he shot calls, you can see kind of the plan starting to form. You can see it being executed. You can see how it unfolds beyond that, and then what the responses are, and then how he'll respond to the response. Because obviously it's great to have a plan that's good, but then you've also got to be able to adapt to what comes at you next. And that's the part you can't, in essence, plan for. You have to react to that in some sense, and already have it in your DNA, within your understanding of the game, what to do next in that scenario. Whether it's a very basic flowchart approach, or whether you are someone who is going to create something out of nowhere, whether you're going to be improvisational in your nature. He's shown himself able to do both, actually. And so I've always found, especially some of those earlier laps, like the Season 4 one's probably my favourite overall, because it was just this chess match back and forth of what he's doing and then what the opponent does. And sometimes the opponent, they're not necessarily doing it all as a unit and as a shot call. They might just make a great individual play back. And seeing, especially in Season 4, that era when it's like Cloud9 could lose the game, they could lose team fighting, they could lose lane, but it felt like the sheer the percentage of how often they made the correct decision on a response, a macro response of what to do, and then losing a situation and then coming up with a plan that gives them a chance to get back in the game was unbelievable, and it really made it a pleasure to watch. And there was a lot to be gleaned from it and to be figured out, and more going on than just the raw flashy aesthetics of the game itself and high skill that you see in League of Legends. It's also a guy where his teams have never been slaves to the meta in that sense. I mean, in Season 3, obviously, they flaunted it massively and had their own picks at different positions that no one was using. Part of the reason why you couldn't ban out the Season 3 Cloud9 is, okay, let's say you had banned out Zac and Nasus from Meteos. Okay, well, it's not like Rumble's the only pick that everyone uses top, but Balls, if you let him on Rumble's going to win a ton of games. If Sneaky and Elimination, who the fuck is banning Ashe and Zyra? No one. But if you give them it, Sneaky's amazing at landing the arrows. That bot lane somehow just works, and obviously by the time Worlds comes around, it actually has some relevance in terms of the Zyra pick, obviously. So this is one of the scenarios. His team, then that was an extreme example, but ever since, they've always shown themselves to seemingly pick the champion based on its utility, its functionality, for what they as individual players and as a team want to be able to do. Not because it's incredibly powerful or it counters this or it's just so good at this point in the game. We never felt like they were slaves to the meta in that particular sense. I also think that this kind of understanding that he has of his team's limits, this is a key thing. He understands his team's limits and their strengths, and therefore ruthlessly decides upon the win conditions and the plan you're going to engage. Because there's no point having a plan that's an amazing plan, it's a perfect response to the opponent, but you actually don't have the ability yourself to pull it off, and your team can't pull it off, and you don't have the tools to pull it off. In that scenario, yeah, you're going to look awesome, you're going to look like you're a genius and they couldn't pull it off, but actually it's not going to be good. There might be a plan that's not as good, it's not as efficient, effective, but it's better for your team and what you have in this scenario. And what's great is, I can understand how he got that sense in a team concept, because it seems like he always had that as an individual player, particularly when he was a mid laner. Obviously the other positions, he's never been a support for most of his career. He was a jungler very early on, but he wasn't a very good jungler back in Season 2. So you look at these periods, when he was a mid laner, primarily is how I'm thinking of his level of play. And this philosophy was mirrored there, because he played to his skills, he played up to what he was capable of, his skill set, but then he didn't go beyond that. He didn't overextend, and as a result, he wasn't a liability outright. Now, obviously, he was a liability in terms of a pure mid laner versus mid laner laning against world-class mid laners. Yes, in that sense, he had to be a liability, because that's a position where you're not just going to fuck around in that particular sense. But, with that said, you have to also consider that most of his other lanes weren't a level of elite Asian players in those carry positions. And so if he had have had some god tier monster top carry top laner and a god tier AD carry, in that point in time maybe he even could have survived as a not so good mid laner. I mean, the obvious example to give would be like Season 5 Kuro. At that point in time, Kuro was not as good as he got in Season 6 when he very much shored up his game, because he had a jungler at that point in time. In Season 5, he could be a liability. He only had a few champions he could really have any chance as just like an outright laning mid laner, just to perform as one of the traditional carries. It was mainly about just not being a liability and helping his team survive, because obviously they had a fantastic bot lane and they had a godlike top lane, and for my money he's been the best in the world for at least 2 years. Absolutely unbelievable player, individually and for the team. So if he'd have had that high, maybe he would even have succeeded at a higher international level, even with his own limitations as a mid laner, despite the fact that is traditionally, I've mentioned this in other videos, the role that has the bias in the game, that can usually carry more so than others at every point in the time. So he's a very, very unique individual in terms of this shot calling prowess, because as much as he could explain to someone how to shot call and maybe bring their level up a bit or give them some concepts, you can't teach that style, you can't teach that skill set. There's something more to it. There's something that goes beyond just if you can write out on paper, well, if I do this, then I do this. It's the ability to know that. It's the ability to come up with that. It's the ability in the moment to be able to apply that, no matter whether you could do it if you had half an hour outside the game, if you can do it in 5 seconds in the game. There's something special there in terms of what you've seen season after season after season. The guy's been playing like 4 seasons now, so it's pretty crazy stuff in terms of the LCS stuff, obviously. I mean, I've always said a general principle that I've really worked on over the last few years. I mainly got it from Counter-Strike, where it's obviously a team-based game that has a lot of communication and people communicate in their native language. So in theory, they can speak and understand each other as well as you could naturally imagine of esports professionals. And I noticed that there were many really good teams that if you heard their comms, they actually didn't communicate as much as some of the lesser teams. Now, that's because, this is the philosophy I've kind of developed myself, overt vocal communication in many team circumstances and contexts acts as an artificial attempt to bridge a lack of understanding, a gap in knowledge, a gap in how team play would operate, how you're going to play and then I'm going to play and then what we're going to do together. That's what you're trying to vocally communicate. So people who happen, and this happens very rarely, but when it does, it's amazing. So Fnatic in CSGO in 2015 is a great example. Gambit, Moscow 5, Season 2, Season 3, obvious example. When you have this amazing natural chemistry, where somehow it just works, you don't have to vocally communicate as much. It naturally is there. The intuitive understanding of what the guy's going to do is there, so you don't need as much of the artifice of the
Wait,
vocal
what?
communication. In some sense, the vocal
Why?
communication is like a scaffolding around it in that particular sense. So I actually think, just purely for his shot calling alone, at this point in the game, he is still worth his weight in gold. I mean, the only person I can really think of in the West at the moment who is quite as comparable is probably Afromu. He's another person. I mean, in his case, he's still very good at his position, but he's another person where, at least over the, I mean, in his case, not 4 seasons, 3 seasons, 2.5 seasons, shown himself to be a very good shot caller with lesser teams as well, and sometimes lesser talents. Similar sense in that, but not quite on the level of high play yet. So I wouldn't necessarily even put him as high as that. But they're both, I think, I'd give him a blank check if I didn't have a player like this in my team. I'd look them immediately. So there are other players who have good qualities. Like, for example, Miffy has developed some great shot calling. But personally, I put Miffy's strength still to this day. I think his unique strength, and the thing that makes him amazing, is if you have a good AD carry, he's a guy you send a blank check to. Because every AD carry he has ever played with, for my money, has been improved by playing with him. Now, sure, of them all, the only one that maybe was better when he wasn't with Miffy was maybe Tabs, when he was in Alliance. But that's because also he was very new to being AD carry when Miffy took him over in Lemonades. All the others, for my money, in general, he's the one who got them to be elite level. He's the one who raised them. He's the one who taught them in the lane how to play beyond just being very skilled, or guys who were able to just play one-dimensionally and bully the lane, or whatever it might be. He's the guy who's got them to that next level. So he's someone who has his own unique qualities that's very good. Now, in terms of high, this is one of those areas where I actually I'm glad someone like me actually is around in esports, because there's obviously not many people have been in many different esports games and know many of the different esports games well or to a deep extent. Because actually there's a fantastic analog comparison point to high, but it's in a totally different game. It's actually in Quake Live, which is basically like a modern version of Quake 3. It's obviously a very old school game, and it's a 1v1 duel game in the mode that we're talking about. And the player who's an analog to high in this shot calling respect and planning and able to read the game, I would actually say is the player Rafa, the North American. He's quite champion. It's a 1v1 game, obviously.
This is pure pain.
Because the thing is, he was never the most skilled player at any point during his championship runs, which is like 4 or 5 years on. He was never, for 1 second, in 1 day, the most skilled player. Never happened. And yet, Quake is known as a mechanically demanding game which rewards mechanical skill. By the way, more so than a game like League of Legends and even Counter-Strike. So, not only was he not that skilled, but he was playing, and his whole peer group of the other potential champions and the other champions of his era were mechanical monsters. He was playing players who have like signature weapons at which they might be the best in the history of the game. Like, obviously, Cypher had probably the best rockets of all time. Avec had an unbelievable plasma gun. Cooler, at one point in time, a long time ago, incredible lightning gun. These players had all the skills in that sense, and he was able to battle them, to compete with them, to outthink them, to defeat them, and to become, at one point in time, a greater champion. Now, they're all champions in their own right, and later on, I postulate that Cypher superseded him, but for this period of time, he managed to do it, and in that sort of a context. So this is why I make him the analog to high. It's that ability to have potentially less and less resources to work with, and to get more out of it than your opponent who has more resources but can't get as much, therefore actually ends up eclipsed by you. You end up the victor, and what you do has a higher chance to succeed. And this is why I'd consider, because Rafa beat those guys with his mind. He read the game, he constructed plans, he used his skills to limit, but not go beyond the limit, you know? And also, just like High, it's like he almost never lost a game, it felt, like just because he was worse. He could be outplayed, he could make the wrong decision, the opponent could play at an incredible level and go above and beyond, but he always brought that bar, that level, and you had to go above it. And that's what I feel like, this is why I've made the video now, because now that I've seen him in FlyQuest, where, you know, a bunch of those players, a lot of people would have said they should be retired. A bunch of these, he doesn't really have the star talents in the same way he's had in some of the past teams. He doesn't even have a Jensen anymore. But this is a guy now where you're just seeing, as a result, take away all the strengths and make them even more reduced. And now you see how he can make up the gap for you and make you a really competitive team and make you a team that can actually do something in this league. So this is a guy where it feels like he doesn't lose the game in that same kind of sense and make the massive blunder. He plays to a certain level, and if you are Cloud9 like they were in that NALCS match recently, yeah, maybe you can go above it. Maybe you can he hits you with the punch and you hit him with the counter knockout. That can happen, certainly. But he forces you up to that elite level because he is one of the best shot callers League of Legends has ever seen. But then Richard just told this story on an episode of the podcast, and then Dan, you know, not entirely unreasonably, was like, "Could you please not do stories out without asking?" Which is fair play, right?
Extreme. Taipei was a good event.
Yeah.
From most perspectives.
I never seen you so happy.
Yeah, I've never seen you so happy. Jason was walking around like a school kid, basically, like just the giddiest person I've ever seen in my life. Just walking around the streets.
We were in Taipei at it was like a gaming convention, so like all the stages in Taipei were like little mini Chun-Li's and their cosplay just like running around. It was great. I was like the happiest. It was like literally stages full of Chun-Li's, and then the next stage would be like Sailor Moon cosplay or like a pirate and Asian
That's what's awesome about like here's the thing, okay? For obvious reasons, a lot of people don't want to go to Russia at the moment. But one thing I'll say about Russian culture and Asian culture in general is that feminism hasn't really gotten a strong grasp on them yet. And so if you go to any sort of gaming thing, it's fucking the shit, mate. Like the visuals, the aesthetic and the scenery is absolutely top draw stuff, you know.
There was a choreographed dance segment before one of the esports competition in Taipei. I have a video of it somewhere. There's actually footage. Anders followed me around that convention. And he somehow hasn't released that incriminating evidence of me just, ear to ear grinning. That was a good event. That was a good event. We need to go back to Asia. I was actually
probably
just
because
Asia.
The video would get taken off the internet because it would be tagged as ape furiously masturbates while watching women in gaming cosplay.
Yeah, that could be it.
Okay.
Actually, I mean that's why this Counterpoints episode is so long. I was just in Asia, guys. I just came back from Thailand, from Cambodia as well. It's good stuff. Asia's a sweet place.
Okay, and Moses is actually our first transgender guest on the show. And see, right. Anyway, so right, obviously we're not going to do a huge breakdown of the major because there's been so much stuff since then, and I actually think with a lot of the stuff that happened in the major, I think because of there wasn't too many surprises in terms of who went how far in the tournament. I actually think there's not like tons to get into because it's a few weeks ago. But I will start with this, okay? So Dan actually did a video recently where he analysed, I think it was the Overpass game, right? The second map of the final. Was that the one that you did?
Did you watch that?
I watched some of it. Like, so
nice.
he broke down the Virtus Pro versus Astralis Overpass game, which obviously was quite a key game because it was a 16-14, and if Astralis had lost this, it would have just been a 2-0 actually, although admittedly every map was reasonably close in the series. So can you obviously people can go and watch the whole video if they want to, Dan, but can you give us like some overview of after making the video, like, you're not just someone who only saw it live like many people, what are your thoughts, your takeaways from how this final played out between Astralis and BP? Like, what were the key aspects?
Nah.
I think a really good way to look at it would be that Astralis, and I think this is if you watch Overpass and you see the where the leaks were for Virtus Pro to actually end up losing that match. Virtus Pro had loads of good spots in the game, but what really shone was actually Astralis' ability to play incredibly safe to a point where they would never ever take risks unless it was necessary, and so they were always forcing Virtus Pro to be in a position where they would have to take initiative, and this is what really worked out incredibly well on the CT side, which was the second of Astralis, which was the second half. And I think that level of consistency and how Astralis were essentially removing volatility from their play was really what made the difference, because when it came to the highly stressed situations, Astralis never really made any mistakes as well at the same time, because they always were sort of like a step ahead in most situations. There are a couple spots where Virtus Pro were already ahead, and this is because one of the reasons why I made the video is because a lot of people said Virtus Pro, they threw that match. They obviously exaggerate in terms that they threw the game. So I wanted to see, was it actually them throwing it, or was it Astralis actually just playing super well? And it was a mix of both things. Virtus Pro, again, they were playing on the grand final stage of a major, which they really felt like they were going to win. Obviously, the pressure was something that was mounting, and there were a couple rounds which were really, really bad. But generally speaking, that happens in grand finals fairly often. And so that's kind of the crazy thing. If you actually put it into the context of the grand finals, the fact that Astralis just played so consistently well across the whole series by playing this like walking that tightrope, because people can really look at it in many ways when you're saying, teams not taking risks. Not taking risks can be like, that you're playing kind of like a pussy, or it can actually be that you're doing things where you're taking the slightest, or walking the slightest line that you possibly can between getting the most edges but not overstepping. And that's exactly the territory Astralis were at, and that's what they did so well to win that series against Virtus Pro, I think.
But I mean, I actually think that's like a big aspect of how that final played out. Like, if I had to write the sort of win conditions for both teams, I actually think, in a weird way, the way the final played out was correct, in as much as the way Virtus Pro won a lot of rounds in that tournament, even in the semi-final against SK, was like essentially individual players just making huge plays. So like someone like winning a 1v3, or on Terra's side, this is one of the areas where it's most noticeable, someone just doing some really crazy push through a smoke that the CT would never expect. Now when you do that and you pull it off, it looks like, wow, these guys are so ballsy, like how can they even have the confidence to do that? But what people don't take into account is it's going to be very hard to make that work over like a full 3 maps of a series. Like sooner or later, especially against a team like Astralis, who the key for Astralis was, rather than instead of the idea of individuals making plays, what they did every time, which I felt is why they didn't choke fully, is they had a mentality of like, if things get really bad, you come back to the system. So on CT side, that just meant playing in the spots you're supposed to. On T side, that meant that really slow default style they just ran all tournament long. And their key philosophy was, in doing that, it actually takes away the pressure of each individual to make plays, because you think to yourself, as long as I do my little role within this, if I die, okay, the guy behind me might be able to make a play. This guy on the other side of the map can make a play. And so in a way, I think when you put those two philosophies together, if the teams are both good enough in terms of skill, I think actually in theory the system style should work better. It should have a slight edge over the individual style. Now not in the short term, you could certainly win a match doing that. Virtus Pro obviously almost did. But if you played out like 10 best of 3s like that and they all went to full maps, I think in general the Astralis approach makes a lot of sense.
I actually thought that Virtus Pro is the better team in this series. You could even see that slow style didn't work for them at all on train. Worked for Astralis at all on train. That's what kind of got him in that hole of being down 13-7. It was when that line rush outside. That's what really marked the switch where Glaive was just like, because this is the one counter to that. You saw some of the Astralis choke coming in when they were down 13-7. They weren't playing well. They weren't winning clutches. They weren't doing good opening rounds. They weren't closing rounds. And then it seemed like Glaive took all the decision making out of them by forcing them to go faster. That's what really impressed me, was the way they switched up the tempo and almost just said, let's not even think about what we're going to do. Let's just make sure we get out and take a fight, and let's just win it. Let's just put it down to our raw skill. I don't think Virtus Pro threw away Overpass. Certainly, like Zipnik's winning that clutch with like 1 health or 2 health or whatever it is that's not going to happen often. But I definitely think Virtus Pro collapsed on train. That's a match they probably win that third map 9 out of 10 times.
One quick thing as well about Astralis' playstyle, which is really interesting, as when you take into account like individual skill, and also if you take into account the context of Device and how good he is within that system that Astralis want to play. It was really interesting on Overpass specifically because, I mean, generally speaking, if you look at the entire tournament, Device played amazingly, but on the finals he wasn't as impactful. And so you have to look at it and see, how much of that is down to actually, the opponent, and how much of it is down to actually Device, messing up his opportunities. And on Overpass, it's actually kind of sick. If you watch how many rounds there were specific pop flashes perfectly, like perfectly every single time for Device, to the point where he couldn't do anything. But that's also the thing, is that within that system, and why it could be so strong, is that Device's job is only to be working certain positions and allowing and informing his team as to what's going on, because they can play as a complete unit and they're not trying to leverage individual skill because of that style. So it gives them more consistency in the long run because of stuff like that. But from a statistic point of view, it makes him look awful. But in reality, he was doing his job exactly well for the situation.
I think that might have been the most impressive thing I've seen out of Device, was the way in these grand finals, and I remember it specifically on Train, is because he was having such a bad series, and it was the first bad series he'd had all tournament. I think previously, in previous versions of Astralis, that's where he tries to do too much. He goes the other way and he tries to be over aggressive or tries to make too many plays. This time you actually saw him take a step back, and he was like, all right, Kirby's going to be the one taking over. He's going to be carrying it, and I'm just going to play that supportive op style. I'm just going to be watching angles. I'm not going to go for any kind of aggressive picks. I'm just going to be there when the execute comes in to support my teammates in moving forward. Just hold one angle and make sure they can't get killed from this spot, and let everyone else do the work. And I thought that was extremely impressive for a guy who's been a superstar for so long, who was one of the top 5 players in 2016, who'd had an incredible tournament, that he's just able to take a step back like that in that series. And I think that was a big contribution to their win, for sure.
I think that's like a really important development again, I think, as a star player, because there's so many different possibilities when you're a star player, and one of the things that you have to think about is like mitigating the spots when you can't play as well, and recognizing quickly that you're in a spot where you aren't going to be as effective in a map or a series, and being able to understand, like set the right limitations so that you don't fuck everything up, because some star players can get very single track minded when it comes to like them not getting in spots where they can get the kills, or maybe they fucked up that one situation. It kind of snowballs a little bit, and then they start going a bit nuts, thinking that they have to do more than they actually should, and they start overreaching, and it causes like all kinds of problems within the team. And so to me, that does like show an evolution of him as a player to recognize those spots, but also again, like the system of the team helps to prop him up and generate consistency there. Because of course, previously, let's say if you take the old simple, any of the old many simple teams, when simple's going off, it looks amazing and you can win a game, but as soon as that's not happening, there's no system to really back it with, so then it just fails.
That's also, though, where I think like a huge advantage that Astralis had now that they've never had in the past when they had Fetish and Karrigan, is that Glaive himself actually can kill on the T side. And so the key thing is, he himself is kind of doing what you're saying here, Dan, which is like when he notices, in fact, this is one of the things I noticed throughout the tournament. Anytime there's a scenario where on T side, like Astralis hasn't really got, like the gun rounds, they're not winning many of them yet, he nearly always calls something where he has to like go in first into an obvious example is like on Dust 2 at the double doors. No one wants to be the first guy out the double doors there. Like the amount of angles you get shot by first is like, it's ridiculous. So the amount of times he would do that and then himself sometimes even be able to get the kill there, I thought it gave them like a massive advantage, because it meant that they didn't always have to have whoever was like the last guy coming in like a 1v3 or something ridiculous when it's a tough round, you know. So I think he did a really good job, and obviously the final was the extreme example on Train of like knowing when to like vary the tempo, when to change up what he was doing in a tactic, because the problem is, with the exception of maybe Fallen, most other in-game leaders don't even have the option to do like if you are MSL or Pronax, like you're already planning essentially to sort of die in the round. Like your job is essentially going to be to set someone else up to win the round. So the problem is, if they're just not doing it, like you're doing everything else and they're just dying, you can't then just go. Like MSL can't go, you know what, like I'm just going to come to this spot, I'm going to take this aspect, I'm going to entry, and then I'm going to set the, you know, he can't do that. Like it's very frustrating for a guy like that, and that's why I actually feel like Karrigan got quite frustrated in Astralis before, because I know when he was playing quite bad individually, he used to feel like, well, I'm setting everything up, I'm calling everything, but it's that sort of thing of like, you know, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it do it. Ultimately, they have to take part as well and be a part of what's happening.
But the fact that Glaive has to do that, I think it does speak to a lot of the issues Karrigan had in that team. I mean, that shouldn't necessarily be happening, but I think that's part of what Astralis, when they're getting beat, that's when Glaive just knows he has to take the reins, because you know, you see some of that, a little bit of it slipping away, and that's when Astralis doesn't get as aggressive or as confident with those kind of peaks. I mean, fuck, he was really good on the T sides, but fuck that. I think Glaive's biggest impact in this tournament, if you go back and watch some of these matches, whenever they were having like a bad CT side on a map, somehow Glaive would be in a position to just get like some kind of fucking double or triple kill that got him started. Like he was like the one on CT side that would be in position on that round when they're down 6-0 as CT or 7-1 or something like that, where he would just get the double kill, they win the round and they go on a streak, and he'd get them started. And I think that's an incredible impact to have, as the guy who stops the opposing team's momentum and gets your team rolling in the right direction. I noticed that frequently throughout this tournament from Glaive, which was really, really impressive.
I mean, that's another thing though, where one thing that I noticed, not a lot of people notice this, because this is one of those details you have to pick up by like sort of listening to interviews, and then in your own mind like reconstructing events, like what did someone else say in an interview, or what does that mean by process of elimination. So one aspect I actually came up with that not a lot of people followed this storyline, was part of the reason why Kirby was so effective is, I think it was on Twitter that actually Dupree said this, was that basically Dupree just gave a lot of his roles, like the entry fragging type stuff, to Kirby, and it was like, right, you're going to do that now, and then instead I'm going to be, presumably more like later in the round type player, which is actually a very different style than Dupree's ever played before. So actually, that's one of the reasons why you notice I'm very, very reticent to put the blame for what happened in Astralis just onto Carrigan and go, right, well, he's gone, so he must have been the problem. And part of the reason why is because when he first brought in Kirby, he made the mistake of making that tweet where he said, like, I'm going to give Kirby all his spots he had in Dignitas. And so it sounded almost like, the implication almost was, if it doesn't work, then either he's bad or, it's not us. Like, we're going to give him the opportunity. But actually, if you look at how Kirby thrived here and the style that he used to play in Astralis, like, basically, in Astralis, he was the star player. He had everything he wanted. I don't think they actually ever, despite what he said initially as his aim, I don't think they actually ever managed to get that balance right in Astralis. And unfortunately, I think part of the reason why, if I had to guess, if you do the process of elimination, is because Dupree was already still in the team, and Dupree hadn't really got into his full slump yet. For me, his slump was like in the summer of this year, which is after they already had Kirby. So the problem is, it's when you join Astralis in the past, it's the same reason why no one wants to be the 5th player to join NIP. If you join NIP, you are not getting Get Right and Forest spots. They have played those spots and that style within the team for so many years. Your best option is maybe you can take something else that's available. Like if you're Alu, okay, you can be the AWPer. But you're never going to get exactly what you want if you're even vaguely a similar type of player. So I think a mixture of Dupree's level going down, which by the way means that I think he knew himself, like if this Astralis doesn't work out, I'm the next in line to get kicked. So he's been willing to sacrifice, but as a result, that's let a guy in Kirby who has a lot of potential have a chance to shine. Now, he's probably not going to do this again in all the other tournaments, but he had his chance to shine. And now you've got this really ridiculous balance where you've got Glaves doing an amazing job in game leading and fragging. Device is like fully unleashed.